What does a psychological experiment have to do with a true crime channel? Well, Stanley Milgram was trying to determine why many people comply with the requests of authorities. He hoped to explain why typical Germans became Nazis and committed horrific crimes during the Holocaust. If successful, it might help to understand why people put white sheets on their head and follow the local KKK agent into committing horrific crimes, or why soldiers like the ones at Abu Ghraib torture their captives. He wanted to explain the psychology behind genocide. He wanted to know if Eichmann and the millions of others who were simply following orders, or were they each an accomplice? Hint: the answers are far more complex than what Milgram found, but what Milgram found is a piece of the puzzle. Why people obey authority can tell us quite a bit about how some crimes happen and explain why some things like counseling to commit a crime are in fact crimes. The experiments were conducted at Yale University, and they went like this. They collected 40 or so men between the ages of 20 and 50 with different occupations and different levels of education. All of these men were the teachers. There were two other participants in the experiment, the so-called experimenter and the student. At the beginning of the experiment, the teacher and student would be introduced. The student would be attached to a number of wires that looked particularly daunting and strapped into a chair. The experimenter would tell the teacher this was so the student could not escape. The rig was meant, as far as the teacher was concerned, to administer an electric shock to the student. The teacher was told that the idea is that people learn best when they receive a punishment, or the shock, for making mistakes. The teacher is then brought into the next room, and a partition separates the student and the teacher. The teacher can hear the student but cannot see them. The experimenter sits in a room with the teacher and explains a relatively straightforward-looking machine with a panel of controls that will administer the shocks. The machine's switches go from mild shock at 15 volts to danger, severe shock at 450 volts, written right on the machine. The teacher is told to administer the shocks one after the other each time the student makes a mistake. A series of words is read to the student, and if the student returns the right word set, there's no shock. If they make a mistake, there's a shock. Here's the thing though. The experiment wasn't about learning by punishment. It was all about how far the teacher would go. The game, so to speak, was rigged. The student would be making the mistakes. They wouldn't even be trying to improve. The experimenter wasn't recording how well the student learned either. The experimenter was directing the teacher to administer the next shock. So, what happened? Well, all of the men went up to at least 300 volts. The student would scream and yell and tell the teacher to stop, and
this will be at 3:30.
Those noises were actually pre-recorded. Despite that, 65% went up to the full 450 volts indicated on the machine, even when the student would pretend to be unconscious.
This one will be 195 volts. The correct one.
Let me out of here.
Slow. Dance.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me out.
Responsible for it. Red. That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30. The correct phrase is rich
Let me out of
boy.
here. Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out, I tell you. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. You have no right to hold me
The
here.
next phrase is
Let me
fast.
out. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Bird,
Let me out.
car, train, plane.
Continue, teacher.
That is incorrect. This will be 3:45. The correct answer is fast.
They went that far even though the teacher themselves were showing extreme emotional distress. The experimenter never physically hurt the teacher, and yet they went up to 450 volts. The experimenter never threatened to hurt the teacher, and yet again, 450 volts. The teacher was paid for the session no matter what they did, whether they went that far or not. So what did the experimenter do? He directed the teacher, told them that it was imperative to continue, that he must continue, and only 35% of the participants would say no and stop somewhere between 300 and 450 volts. Milgram actually believed that there was something distinct about the German character that made them prone to obey the Nazi command group. He was wrong, and so abandoned the idea, and he would repeat the experiment. He abandoned the idea that he would repeat the experiment on German participants, hoping to pinpoint a difference. Though he was hoping to find answers to why genocide happens, the experiments were nothing like the Nazis in the Holocaust, or even the soldiers and detainees at Abu Ghraib. We can take away a very small piece of a complex puzzle, perhaps, but a small piece, a minuscule piece, it is indeed. Actual real-life events on the scale of what happened during World War II, what happened in Cambodia, the mass suicide and homicides at Jonestown, and what happened in Rwanda are just far too complex and involve more than a simple psychological factor to explain. Later variations, though, of the experiments were repeated throughout the world with similar results. This is disturbing enough. It means that we have to be that much more on guard when we consider obeying authority. It also means that those in authority have an obligation to monitor themselves and their demands. The experiment has been heavily criticized, and just as serial killers very often force changes to the law, Milgram's experiments would see changes to the accepted ethical standards of psychological research. And those experiments could not be done in the way that Milgram did them today in the United States. Still in all, his research was far more ethical than many others that we'll cover in later videos. Stay tuned for those. Some pretty nasty things have been done under the guise of science and discovery. If you're enjoying these videos and want more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.